The military academy rooftop wasn't supposed to be accessible after hours, but that had never stopped anyone before. The wind cut across the concrete ledge where Captain Lydia Corvus stood, her fingers wrapped around the rusted railing, staring into the sodium-lit darkness below. She'd come up here to think, to escape the cafeteria noise and the sideways glances that followed her everywhere since she'd arrived as the new tactical flight instructor 3 weeks ago. Behind her, she heard the door bang open. Footsteps, laughter with edges sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't turn around. The voices belonged to the same cluster of second-year cadets who'd been testing her patience since day one, led by a kid named Brennick whose father was some congressman with enough pull to make complaints disappear. They thought she was soft because she was 5'4" and didn't raise her voice during briefings. They thought she was a diversity hire because the Navy had quotas to fill. They thought a lot of things and none of them were true. Lydia had stopped trying to correct assumptions years ago. Brennick's voice cut through the wind. "Yo, Captain Perfect, you lost." 3 of them, maybe 4. She could hear their boots scuffing concrete, spreading out in a loose semicircle behind her. The academy had a hazing problem everyone pretended didn't exist, and she'd walked right into the middle of it by not playing along with their games, by marking them down for sloppy pre-flight checks, by holding them to the same standards she'd hold anyone. "We heard you talking to the commandant," Brennick continued, closer now, "about our flight ratings. That wasn't very cool." Lydia finally turned, slowly, her expression giving away nothing. Brennick stood 6 feet tall with the kind of smirk that came from never facing real consequences. His friends flanked him, 2 on each side, all wearing civilian clothes, all watching her like she was prey. "Your ratings reflect your performance," she said quietly. "You want better scores, fly better." One of them laughed, a short bark of sound. "You don't even know who you're talking to. Brennick's dad could have you reassigned to some weather station in Alaska with 1 phone call." She almost smiled. Almost. Because they had no idea what she'd survived to get here, no idea what the Coulson Corvus actually meant in certain circles, no idea that the quiet woman they'd cornered on this rooftop had done things in places that didn't appear on any map. "That's his choice," Lydia said. Brennick stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You know what? I'm tired of your attitude. Maybe you need a lesson about how things actually work around here." The shove came fast, 2 hands against her shoulders meant to scare more than harm. But Lydia's center of gravity was already shifting, her weight already moving backward, and suddenly there was no railing behind her, just open air and a 4-story drop to the parade ground below. She didn't scream. That was the first thing Brennick would remember later, in the investigation rooms and the sleepless nights that followed. She didn't scream or flail or grab for purchase. She just fell, silent as a shadow, disappearing over the edge into darkness. For 3 seconds the rooftop was completely still. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God." Brennick stumbled forward, his face white, staring down at the parade ground where Captain Corvus should have been a broken shape on the concrete. But the ground was empty, just lamplight and shadows and the faint sound of wind moving through the academy's flagpoles. "Where is she?" one of the others hissed. They all crowded the edge, looking down, looking around, seeing nothing. Panic began to set in, the kind that came with realizing you just killed someone, that your life was over, that your father's connections wouldn't save you from manslaughter. Then Brennick's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number, just 2 words. "Nice try." He looked up just as the rooftop access door opened and Captain Corvus walked through it, completely unharmed, her expression carved from stone. She'd caught the drainage pipe 1 floor down, swung through an open window into the 3rd-floor hallway and taken the stairs back up. The whole maneuver had taken less than 90 seconds. Behind her, 2 military police officers stepped onto the rooftop, their faces grim. The security cameras had caught everything. Brennick's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Lydia stopped 5 feet away from them, her voice quiet and cold. "In case you're wondering, I spent 6 years with DEVGRU. That's SEAL Team 6, for those of you who don't know. Before that, I was a Navy combat search and rescue pilot. I've been shot down twice, extracted under fire in 4 different countries, and earned 3 Bronze Stars doing it. The Coulson Corvus means raven. It's what they called me because I kept coming back from missions they thought would kill me." The cadets stood frozen, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning fog. One of them was visibly shaking. The MPs moved forward, hands on their restraints. "You're all under arrest," the senior officer said flatly. "Attempted assault on a superior officer, possible attempted murder depending on how the JAG decides to charge it." Brennick found his voice, though it came out strangled. "We didn't mean. We were just—" Lydia held up one hand, stopping him. The MPs paused, waiting. She studied the 5 cadets for a long moment, seeing past their fear to the stupid, reckless kids underneath. They'd made a catastrophic mistake born from arrogance and entitlement, but she'd seen worse. She'd been worse, once upon a time, before the Navy had sanded down her rough edges and taught her what discipline actually meant. "Here's what's going to happen," she said quietly. "You're going to be processed and charged. Your families will be notified. The Academy Board will review your status. But I'm going to make a recommendation." She paused, making sure they were listening. "I'm going to recommend intensive remedial training instead of expulsion. 6 months of the hardest physical and academic program this academy offers. You'll earn back your flight privileges one evaluated sortie at a time. You'll learn what it actually means to be a military officer instead of playing dress-up in your father's shadow." Brennick's eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" Lydia's expression didn't change. "Because 10 years ago, I was a hot-headed fighter pilot who thought I knew everything. Someone gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. I'm paying that forward. But if any of you screw up again, if I hear about one more incident of hazing or attitude or cutting corners, I will personally ensure you never fly for any military branch ever. We clear?" They nodded, mute and shaken. The MPs led them away, and Lydia was left alone on the rooftop again, the wind colder now, the stars hidden behind cloud cover. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in months. Commander Marcus Webb. Her old co from her rescue pilot days, before DVGRU, before everything changed. Answered on the second ring. "Corvus. Didn't expect to hear from you tonight. Everything okay?" She leaned against the railing, suddenly tired. "Define okay. Just had some cadets try to push me off a building." A long pause, then, "Jesus, you all right?" "I'm fine, they're not. Question is, did I make the right call recommending remedial instead of the boot?" Webb was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You remember Lieutenant Sykes, kid who nearly crashed that Seahawk during your first year instructing?" Lydia smiled faintly. "Yeah, cocky little bastard thought he could fly through a thunderstorm because he'd logged 200 hours. He's a major now, flew medical evacs in Syria, saved 43 lives last deployment. You're the one who recommended he get another shot after that incident." The memory settled over her, sharp and clear. She'd been so angry at Sykes, so ready to write him off. But something in his eyes during the debrief had reminded her of herself, and she'd chosen mentorship over punishment. "Different situation," she said. "Sykes was reckless, not malicious." "Malicious kids don't usually change," Webb agreed. "But scared kids who just realize they're not invincible, those might. You'll know better than me whether these ones are worth the effort." Lydia looked out over the academy grounds, at the flight line where tomorrow's aircraft sat waiting under their covers, at the barracks windows glowing with light and life. "I'll know in 6 months," she said. "Either they'll prove me right or they'll prove me wrong." "That's the job," Webb said gently. "Teaching isn't just about the ones who make it easy. It's about the ones who make you question whether you're wasting your time, right up until the moment they prove you weren't." They talked for another 10 minutes about nothing important, just the comfortable conversation of old colleagues, before Lydia finally said good night and hung up. The rooftop was getting too cold to stay any longer. The next morning, the entire academy was buzzing with the story. Details had leaked despite the MP's best efforts, and by breakfast, everyone knew that 5 cadets had tried to push the new tactical instructor off a building, and she'd basically vanished into thin air. The rumors grew more elaborate by the hour. She'd parachuted down. She'd rappelled using her belt. She'd landed in a tree. Nobody had the real story, but everyone had an opinion. Lydia walked into the instructor's briefing room to find her colleagues waiting. Major Harrison, who taught advanced aerobatics, looked up from his coffee with something approaching respect. Heard you had an interesting night. She poured herself a cup, keeping her expression neutral. Could say that. The old man wants to see you, Harrison continued. Commandant's office, 0900, probably wants to hear your side before the board convenes. Lydia nodded. She'd expected as much. The commandant, General Vickers, ran the academy with an iron fist wrapped in protocol. He wouldn't let something like this slide without a full investigation, regardless of her recommendations. At precisely 9, she stood outside his office door, her uniform immaculate, her mind clear. The aide waved her in. General Vickers was a lean man in his 60s, his hair steel gray, his eyes the color of winter sky. He gestured to a chair without preamble. Captain Corvus, sit. We need to talk about last night and why you think I should waste 6 months of academy resources on cadets who tried to murder you. Lydia sat, her posture perfect. With respect, sir, I don't think they tried to murder me. I think they tried to scare me and miscalculated badly. Vickers leaned back, studying her. You're splitting hairs. Intent matters less than outcome. If you hadn't been capable of that drain pipe maneuver, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Agreed, sir. But we're not having that conversation because I was capable, and that's exactly why they need to stay. The general's eyebrows rose. Explain. Lydia chose her words carefully. These cadets are here because they want to serve, or at least they wanted to at some point. Somewhere along the way, they got the idea that rank and connections matter more than competence. That's a failure of the system, not just personal character. They need to unlearn that, and expelling them just sends them into civilian life with all the same toxic assumptions intact. Maybe they go work for daddy's defense contractor. Maybe they end up in politics. Either way, we've just created 5 more people in positions of influence who think rules don't apply to them. Vickers tapped his desk, his expression unreadable. And if they don't learn, if they wash out of your remedial program, then they wash out having faced real consequences for their actions, Lydia said. They'll know they were given a chance and couldn't meet the standard. That's different from being expelled for one mistake. That's failing on merit. A long silence stretched between them. Outside the window, a formation of training aircraft roared past, practicing carrier approaches on the simulated deck. Finally, Vickers nodded slowly. I'll back your recommendation, but you're going to be the one overseeing their remedial training personally. 6 months, Captain. They're your responsibility. If they succeed, you get the credit. If they fail, you eat that too. Understood, sir. One more thing. The general's voice hardened. I read your file before you came here, all of it including the classified sections. I know what you did in Yemen and Somalia in places we're not supposed to admit we operate. I know why you left DEVGRU. So let me be clear, I don't care about your combat record. I care about whether you can teach. These kids try to hurt you and you're choosing rehabilitation. That's either wisdom or a savior complex, and I need to know which. Lydia met his eyes without flinching. It's neither, sir. It's just math. The military spent millions training me. Someone invested in me when I was broken. The return on that investment has been pretty good. I'm applying the same logic here. 5 cadets, 6 months versus a lifetime of them being obstacles to good order and discipline. The math works. Vickers almost smiled. Dismissed, Captain, and Corvus. Don't fall off any more buildings. Paperwork's a nightmare. She stood, saluted, and left his office feeling the weight of what she'd just taken on. 6 months. 5 cadets who tried to kill her, whether they'd meant to or not. She had half a year to turn them into something resembling officers, or admit she'd been wrong. The remedial program started Monday. That gave her the weekend to design a curriculum that would break them down and build them back up, assuming they had anything worth building. She spent Saturday in the Academy's archives, pulling training records, accident reports, and personnel files. By Sunday night, she had a plan. It wasn't gentle. The first week would be pure physical conditioning, the kind that made boot camp look like summer vacation. Not as punishment, but as reset. They needed to remember what it felt like to be at the bottom, to have nothing but their own determination to get them through each day. The second week would introduce them to the aircraft they'd eventually fly, but not from the cockpit. They'd learn every system, every wire, every rivet from the ground up. They'd assist the maintenance crews, pull grease monkey duty, understand the machines as more than just transportation. Week 3, flight simulators. Not fun flight, not Top Gun theatrics. Emergency procedures, system failures, situations where textbook answers got you killed and instinct was all you had left. They'd fly until they couldn't think straight, until their hands moved without conscious thought. After that, academics. Real academics, not just the regurgitation of facts they'd been coasting on. Tactical theory, military history, leadership case studies. She'd make them analyze their own failure, write essays about what they'd done wrong and why, present their findings to each other without mercy. Only then, if they survived all of that, would she let them near a real aircraft. And that's when the true test would begin. Monday morning, 05:30, the 5 cadets stood in a line outside the academy's auxiliary gym. They wore PT gear, their faces pale with exhaustion. Lydia had woken them at 0500 with a phone call, told them to be here in 15 minutes and hung up. Brennick looked like he'd thrown up recently. Good. She stepped out of the gym, her own PT gear immaculate, her expression giving nothing away. You're late. That's 15 seconds each. Drop and give me 30 push-ups. They hesitated. She didn't raise her voice. Every second you waste debating costs you 10 more, your choice. They dropped. She watched, counting silently, correcting form with sharp observations. Cadet Morrison, your back's sagging. That's not a push-up, that's an insult to physics. Start over. Morrison groaned but complied. When they finished, she had them run. Not a jog, not a distance run, but sprints. 30 seconds all out, 30 seconds rest. Repeat until someone quit or passed out. Nobody quit, though 2 of them vomited in the bushes. After an hour of this, she finally called a halt. They collapsed on the grass, gasping. Lydia stood over them, barely winded. This is your baseline. This is where you are right now. Soft, undisciplined, used to coasting on potential instead of performance. For the next 6 months, we're going to fix that. You're going to learn what it actually takes to earn wings, to earn the right to call yourself an officer. And some of you aren't going to make it. Brennick looked up, his face red and sweaty. Why are you doing this? You could have just let them expel us. Lydia crouched down, meeting his eyes. Because I think you might be salvageable, but that's up to you, not me. I'm just providing the opportunity. Whether you take it or waste it is your decision. She stood. Shower, eat. Be in classroom 6 at 0800. We're going to talk about judgment, consequences, and what it means to lead people who trust you with their lives. The classroom session was worse than the PT. Lydia had prepared a presentation, but not the kind they expected. She started with photographs. Combat search and rescue missions gone wrong, crashed helicopters, body bags, memorial services for pilots who died because someone made a bad decision under pressure. This is the job, she said quietly, advancing through the slides. This is what happens when you screw up in a cockpit. Not a bad grade, not a stern talking to. People die. Maybe you, maybe your crew, maybe the people depending on you to pull them out of hell. The cadets sat in silence, their earlier defiance completely gone, replaced by something harder to define. Horror, maybe, or the first stirrings of actual understanding. She showed them footage from her own missions, the ones that weren't classified. A night rescue in Iraq, her helicopter taking ground fire, her co-pilot wounded, still managing to extract 4 Marines from a hot LZ. Another mission in Afghanistan, a crashed F-16, the pilot injured, Taliban forces closing in. She'd landed in a valley that barely fit her rotor span, held position for 90 seconds while her crew chief pulled the fighter pilot aboard, then pulled pitch so hard the transmission screamed in protest. You want to know why they call me Corvus? She asked, pausing the footage on a frame of her helicopter silhouetted against tracer fire. It's because ravens are scavengers. They show up where death is. My job was to show up in the worst places on Earth and bring people home anyway. I did that for 6 years before I even got to DEVGRU. And every single mission, every single time, the difference between success and failure was discipline, training, trusting your crew and being worthy of their trust. She advanced to the last slide. A photograph of her team, taken somewhere in East Africa, all of them in dusty flight suits, exhausted but grinning. 3 of these people are dead now, she said softly. Not because they weren't good enough, because war doesn't care how good you are, but they died knowing they'd done everything right, that they'd served with honor, that they'd earned their place. The silence in the classroom was absolute. Finally, Cadet Morrison spoke, her voice small. "How do we earn hours?" Lydia turned off the projector and the room seemed darker without the images. "You start by acknowledging what you did, not making excuses, not blaming circumstances. You tried to hurt me because you were angry and entitled and didn't think there'd be consequences. Say it out loud. Own it." Brennick went first, his voice rough. "I pushed you because I was angry and entitled and didn't think there'd be consequences." The others followed, each admission sounding like it physically hurt. When they finished, Lydia nodded. "Good, that's step one. Step two is understanding that the military isn't about you. It's about the mission and the people beside you. Every decision you make affects someone else. Every shortcut endangers lives. Every moment of laziness erodes trust. You've been treating this academy like it's a game, like flight school is just an extension of college. It's not." She pulled out a stack of folders, handed one to each cadet. "These are your new schedules. Physical training at 0530 every morning. Maintenance duty from 0800 to 1200. Academics from 1300 to 1700. Simulator time from 1800 to 2100. Study and personal time until lights out at 2300. 6 days a week. Sunday you get off, but I expect you to use it productively." Cadet Hayes, who hadn't spoken yet, looked at his schedule with something approaching despair. This is more than the regular academy load." "Correct," Lydia said calmly, "because you're not regular cadets anymore. You're remedial, you're proving you deserve to be here. If you wanted easy, you should have thought about that before you committed assault." She gathered her materials. "One more thing. You're not just doing this for yourselves. Every instructor here is watching to see if I made the right call. Every other cadet is watching to see if you're actually changing or just playing along. Your performance reflects on me, on this program, on the entire concept of second chances. So when you're exhausted and angry and want to quit, remember that." The first month was brutal. The cadets stumbled through each day in a haze of exhaustion, their bodies aching, their minds struggling to absorb the avalanche of information Lydia threw at them. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Brennick stopped making excuses. Morrison started asking intelligent questions during maintenance duty. Hayes discovered he had a natural aptitude for emergency procedures. The other two, Cadets Ortiz and Park, formed a study partnership that lifted both their grades. Lydia watched it all, saying nothing, letting their progress speak for itself. She wasn't looking for gratitude or friendship. She was looking for transformation, and that was harder to measure. At the end of the first month, she assembled them in the hangar where the academy kept its training helicopters. Not the sleek modern ones, but the older models used for mechanical instruction. "You're going to do a complete teardown and rebuild of this US-60, she announced. "Every system, every component, you have 2 weeks. If it doesn't pass inspection when you're done, you start over." They stared at the helicopter like it was a mountain they'd been told to move with their hands. "We don't know how to do that," Ortiz said. Lydia smiled, the first real smile they'd seen from her. "Then you'd better learn. Manual's over there. Chief Warrant Officer Ramos will supervise so you don't kill yourselves. But this is your project. Make it happen." She left them there, and over the next 2 weeks she watched them struggle and argue and gradually figure it out. They worked late into the nights, covered in grease, yelling at each other about torque specs and hydraulic pressure. They made mistakes and had to redo entire sections. But they didn't quit. On the 14th day, Lydia and CWO Ramos conducted the inspection together. The old warrant officer was legendarily tough, a former Night Stalker who'd flown support for Delta Force and had standards that made drill sergeants look permissive. He went over every inch of that helicopter with a critical eye while the cadets stood at attention, sweating despite the cool hangar air. Finally, Ramos stepped back. "It'll fly," he said grudgingly. "Barely, but it'll fly." The cadets' relief was visible, their shoulders sagging. Lydia nodded. "Good, because tomorrow we're taking it up. You're going to see what happens when theory meets reality, when all those systems you rebuilt have to work perfectly or people die." That night, for the first time since the Rooftop incident, Brennick approached her after hours. She was in her office, reviewing the next phase of training when he knocked on the open door. "Captain Corvus, got a minute?" She gestured to a chair. He sat looking uncomfortable. I wanted to say something about that night on the rooftop. Lydia waited. I've been thinking about it a lot, about what we did, what could have happened. And I keep coming back to the fact that you didn't have to give us this chance. You could have let the system crush us and we deserved it. So I guess I'm trying to say thank you, even though that feels inadequate. Lydia set down her pen, studying him. The cocky kid from 2 months ago was gone, replaced by someone older, more serious. You want to know the real reason I recommended remedial, she asked. Brennick nodded. Because I looked at your file before you pushed me. Your entrance exam scores were exceptional. Your aptitude tests put you in the top 5% of your class. But your performance was mediocre because you weren't trying. You were coasting on talent and connections, and that made me angry. Not because you tried to hurt me, but because you were wasting potential. She leaned forward. The military needs good officers, Brennick. Not politicians' sons playing soldier, not people checking boxes for their resumes. We need people who will do the hard thing when it matters, who will choose the mission over their ego. I think you might be capable of that. But you have to want it more than you want the easy path. Brennick was quiet for a long moment. I do want it. I didn't before, but I do now. This whole thing, everything you've put us through, it's the first time in my life I've had to actually earn something. Lydia nodded. Then keep earning it. We're halfway through remedial. The next 3 months are going to be harder. Flight training, tactical scenarios, leadership exercises. I'm going to put you in situations where there's no right answer, just less wrong choices. That's when you find out who you really are. Brennick stood. I won't let you down, ma'am. After he left, Lydia sat alone in her office, staring at the framed photograph on her desk. Her old rescue crew, the one from the presentation, all of them smiling despite the dust and heat. 3 of them dead now, including her co-pilot, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. Chen, who'd taken a bullet meant for Lydia during an extraction in Yemen, who'd kept her seat long enough for Lydia to get the helicopter clear before bleeding out. Chen, who'd made Lydia promise to keep teaching, to pass on what they'd learned together, to never give up on people who could still be saved. I'm trying, Lydia whispered to the photograph. Hope I'm doing this right. The next morning, they took the rebuilt A-60 up for its first post-maintenance flight. Lydia let Ramos fly left seat while she supervised from the right, the 5 cadets crammed into the back, helmets on, intercom live. Okay, kiddos, Ramos drawled as he pulled pitch. Let's see if your rebuild job holds together or turns this bird into the world's fastest lawn dart. The helicopter lifted smoothly, all systems green. They climbed to 3,000 feet and Ramos put the aircraft through a series of increasingly aggressive maneuvers. Turns, climbs, descents, auto-rotations. Everything worked perfectly. The cadets' tension slowly transformed into something like pride. Then Ramos shut down the number 2 engine. Lost an engine, he announced calmly. Cadet Brennick, you're talking me through the emergency procedure. Go. Brennick's voice came through the intercom, steady despite his obvious nerves. Okay. First, verify which engine failed. Check the instruments for. Too slow, Lydia cut in. In combat, you don't have time to check instruments. You feel it, you react, try again. Brennick took a breath. Right engine failed based on yaw. Apply left pedal to maintain heading. Adjust collective and cyclic to compensate for asymmetric thrust. Verify remaining engine is within limits. Prepare for emergency landing if situation deteriorates. Better, Lydia said. Ramos brought the engine back online, and they continued the training flight for another hour. Each cadet took turns talking through emergencies, system failures, tactical scenarios. By the time they landed, Lydia had a clearer picture of where each of them stood. Morrison had the best grasp of systems. Hayes was coolest under pressure. Ortiz had natural leadership instincts he didn't know he possessed. Park was the weakest link, but he compensated with meticulous preparation. And Brennick, despite his earlier arrogance, had the raw talent to be genuinely exceptional if he could just stay humble. Over the next 6 weeks, they flew almost daily. Not in the rebuilt helicopter, but in the Academy's modern trainers, learning the fundamentals of military aviation from people who'd done it under fire. Lydia arranged for guest instructors, combat veterans who came in and shared their experiences without sugarcoating the reality. a Marine Corps Harrier pilot who'd ejected over Afghanistan, an Air Force pararescue jumper who'd pulled wounded soldiers from a crashed Chinook while taking fire, a Coast Guard helicopter pilot who'd executed water rescues in hurricane conditions. Each of them drove home the same message. Competence was the price of admission, but character was what kept you alive. The cadets absorbed it all like dry ground soaking up rain. They weren't the same people who'd stood on that rooftop 5 months ago. The change was visible in how they carried themselves, how they spoke to each other, how they approached every task with seriousness instead of cynicism. And then came the final exercise. Lydia designed it herself, a scenario so complex and demanding that even experienced pilots would struggle. She briefed them in the tactical planning room, the lights low, a map of the training range glowing on the screen. "Your mission," she began, "is a combat search and rescue in denied territory. You have one helicopter, a 4-person crew, limited fuel, and hostile forces between you and the objective. The downed pilot is injured and has an inbound enemy patrol reaching his position in 40 minutes. Time on station is limited due to fuel constraints. The weather is deteriorating. You need to plan the ingress route, assign crew positions, coordinate with simulated air support, and execute the extraction without getting shot down yourselves." She paused. "This is the culmination of everything you've learned. You'll be graded on planning, execution, crew coordination, and decision-making under pressure. You have 2 hours to prep, then we fly. Any questions?" Hayes raised a hand. "Are you flying with us?" Lydia shook her head. "No, this is your mission. I'll be in the tower evaluating. You succeed or fail on your own merit." The 2 hours of planning were intense. The cadets spread maps across the table, arguing about routes and tactics, running fuel calculations, assigning roles. Lydia watched from the observation room, saying nothing, letting them work through the problems themselves. Brennick emerged as the mission commander, which was the right call. Morrison took co-pilot. Hayes volunteered for crew chief, and Ortiz would handle navigation and communications. Park became the alternate, ready to step in if anyone faltered. When they launched, Lydia was indeed in the tower, watching their helicopter's progress on radar, listening to their radio communications. She'd coordinated with the range safety officers to throw realistic problems at them: simulated anti-aircraft fire, false intelligence about enemy positions, communication jamming at critical moments. They handled it all with a competence that made something tight in Lydia's chest start to ease. Brennick's flying was smooth and precise. Morrison's navigation kept them on course. Hayes managed the tactical situation with situational awareness that would have impressed a combat veteran. They reached the downed pilot's position with 12 minutes to spare, executed a textbook landing under simulated fire, and extracted the role player before egressing along a different route to avoid predictable patterns. Back at base, as the helicopter shut down and the cadets climbed out, Lydia was waiting on the flight line. They stood at attention, exhausted but trying not to show it. She looked at each of them, then allowed herself a small nod. That was acceptable work. Acceptable was high praise coming from her, and they knew it. Brennick actually smiled. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Lydia said. "Tomorrow, you present your after-action review to the commandant and the instructor staff. You'll explain every decision you made, justify every choice, and accept criticism of your mistakes. That's the last step." The next day, the 5 cadets stood before a panel of the Academy's toughest instructors, including General Vickers, and systematically broke down their mission. They identified what went right and, more importantly, what went wrong. They didn't make excuses. They didn't deflect blame. They owned their errors and explained how they'd correct them next time. When they finished, the room was silent. Then General Vickers stood. "Cadets, based on Captain Corvus's evaluation and your demonstrated performance, the remedial board has determined that you've successfully completed the program. Your flight privileges are hereby reinstated, and you're cleared to rejoin your regular classes." He paused. "But understand this. You'll be watched more closely than any other students here. You've been given a second chance that most people don't get. Use it wisely or the consequences will be permanent." They saluted in unison. "Yes, sir." After the board dismissed them, Lydia found herself alone with Vickers in the hallway. The general studied her with those winter sky eyes. "You did good work here, Captain. I wasn't sure this would pan out, but you proved me wrong." "They did the work, sir. I just provided the framework." "Don't sell yourself short. Teaching is harder than combat in some ways. In combat, you know immediately if you succeeded. Teaching, you have to wait years to see if it took." He started to walk away, then turned back. "One more thing. There's a position opening up at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. Advanced Tactical Instruction for Fleet Pilots. They asked me to recommend someone, and I'm putting your name forward. Interested?" Lydia felt something stir in her chest, an old familiar pull toward the sharp end of military aviation. "I'll think about it, sir." "You do that. In the meantime, enjoy your success. These 5 might just become the officers we need them to be, thanks to you." After he left, Lydia walked out to the flight line, watching the sun set over rows of aircraft. The sky was turning colors, deep orange bleeding into purple, the kind of sunset that made you remember why you fell in love with flying in the first place. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brennick. "Thank you for not giving up on us." She typed a reply. "Thank you for not giving up on yourselves." It was true. She'd provided the structure, but they'd done the hard work of transformation. They'd faced their failure and rebuilt themselves from the foundation up, and that was something no instructor could force. Over the next few months, Lydia watched them progress through the academy's regular curriculum with a quiet satisfaction. They weren't perfect. They still made mistakes, still had moments of frustration and doubt, but they'd fundamentally changed how they approached challenges, and that made all the difference. Brennick went on to graduate second in his class and requested assignment to search and rescue, specifically citing Captain Corvus's influence on his decision. Morrison became an instructor herself, teaching navigation and tactical planning. Hayes joined a Marine Corps transport squadron and flew combat missions in the Pacific. Ortiz and Park both ended up flying strike fighters, the roles they'd originally wanted but now understood they had to earn. Lydia attended each of their graduation ceremonies, a quiet presence in the back row, watching them receive their wings and commissions. Afterward, they always found her, always thanked her again, and she always told them the same thing: pay it forward. Someday you'll have the chance to help someone who screwed up. Remember what that felt like and give them what I gave you. The job offer from the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center sat on her desk for weeks before she accepted it. It was a promotion, a chance to teach at the highest levels of military aviation, to shape the tactics that would define the next generation of combat pilots. But it also meant leaving the academy, leaving the structured environment where she'd proven she could teach, stepping into something newer and more uncertain. Commander Webb called her the night she accepted. "Congratulations, Captain." "Or should I start calling you Commander?" she laughed. "The promotion board hasn't met yet, don't jinx it. You'll make it, and then you'll be teaching the best of the best, the people who train everyone else. That's a different level of responsibility." "I know," Lydia said quietly. "That's what scares me." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence gets you killed." They talked for a while longer, and after she hung up, Lydia pulled out the old photograph of her rescue crew. Chen's face smiled out at her from the faded print, frozen in that moment before everything changed. "I think I'm finally getting it right," Lydia told the photograph. "Teaching, I mean. Understanding what you were trying to tell me before Yemen, that the mission isn't just about the objective. It's about the people who come after us, making sure they're better than we were." The photograph, of course, said nothing. But in the quiet of her office, surrounded by flight manuals and training reports, Lydia felt something settle into place. A sense of purpose that had been missing since she'd left DEVGRU, since she'd traded the adrenaline rush of direct action for the slower, harder work of instruction. Her last day at the academy, she stood on the rooftop where it had all started. The railing had been reinforced now, safety measures added after the incident. She looked out over the grounds one final time, watching cadets move between buildings, aircraft taking off and landing in precise patterns, the whole complex machinery of military education grinding forward. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned to find all 5 of her former remedial students standing there, now senior cadets, wearing their flight suits with pride. "We heard you were leaving," Brennick said. "Wanted to say goodbye properly." Lydia smiled. "You didn't have to do that." "Actually, we did," Morrison said. "You changed our lives, ma'am. We were on track to become everything wrong with the officer corps and you course-corrected us. That deserves acknowledgement." Hayes stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. "We got you this. It's not much, but we wanted you to have it." Lydia unwrapped the cloth to find a small wooden plaque hand-carved with surprising skill. It showed a raven in flight, wings spread, with 5 smaller birds following in formation. Beneath it, an inscription, "To Captain Corvus, who taught us to fly with honor, from the cadets who learned to earn their wings." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "This is, thank you, all of you." They stood together on that rooftop, 6 people connected by a moment of violence that had transformed into something better, something that would ripple forward through years and conflicts and missions yet to come. "One more thing," Ortiz said. "We talked to the commandant. There's going to be a new award at the academy, given annually to the instructor who best exemplifies dedication to student development. They're calling it the Corvus Teaching Excellence Award." Lydia shook her head, overwhelmed. "That's too much." "It's not enough," Park said quietly. "But it's what we can do. Every year, some instructor will be recognized for doing what you did, seeing potential in difficult students and fighting to develop it. Your name will be part of this place forever." They said their final goodbyes, each of them thanking her one last time, and then they were gone, leaving Lydia alone on the rooftop with her plaque and her memories. She thought about the long road that had brought her here. From a hotshot young pilot with more attitude than sense, to a rescue pilot pulling people out of hell, to a SEAL team operator doing things she still couldn't talk about, to a teacher who'd learned that the hardest missions weren't always the ones conducted under fire. The Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center would be different. She'd be teaching people who were already excellent, helping them become exceptional. But the core principle remained the same. Everyone had potential, everyone deserved investment, and the military's future depended on developing people, not just purchasing platforms. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from General Vickers. "Safe travels, Commander. You've set a standard here that won't be forgotten. Make us proud at NSAWC." She typed back, "Will do, sir, and it's still Captain for another month." His reply came instantly. "The board results leak early sometimes. Congratulations, Commander Corvus, you've earned it." Lydia looked out at the sky, now darkening into night, stars beginning to emerge in the gaps between clouds. Somewhere out there, pilots were flying missions, executing the tactics and procedures that people like her had developed and refined. Somewhere, students were struggling with material that seemed impossible, wondering if they had what it took to earn their wings. And somewhere, an instructor was making the choice between writing someone off or investing in their potential, the same choice she'd made on this rooftop 6 months ago. She hoped they'd choose investment. She hoped they'd remember that the military's strength wasn't just in its technology or its firepower, but in its people, and people could change, could grow, could become better than anyone expected if someone was willing to do the hard work of teaching them. Lydia took one last look at the academy, then walked toward the stairs, toward whatever came next, carrying the plaque and the weight of every student she'd ever taught. The Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center sat on the edge of the Nevada desert, a sprawling complex where the military's best pilots came to learn from the best instructors. Lydia arrived on a Monday morning, her car loaded with everything she owned, her new rank insignia still feeling strange on her uniform. The commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, met her in his office with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "Commander Corvus, heard good things about your work at the academy. Also heard you rehabilitated 5 cadets who tried to kill you." "That true?" Lydia set down her bag. "They didn't try to kill me, sir. They tried to scare me and severely miscalculated." Rodriguez laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "I like you already. Here's the situation. You're taking over the Advanced Tactical Development course. We get fleet pilots with combat experience who need to level up their game. They're all good. Your job is making them great." "Understood, sir. One more thing. We've got a problem student incoming. Lieutenant Cole Marchant, FA-18 pilot, 2 combat deployments, excellent stick-and-rudder skills, terrible attitude. His last co said he's the most talented pilot he's ever seen and also the most likely to get someone killed through sheer arrogance. Sound familiar? Lydia felt a small smile tug at her lips. Intimately familiar, sir. Good, because he's yours. Either you fix him or we ground him permanently. He's too dangerous to leave in the fleet as is, but too talented to waste. I'm giving you 6 weeks. 6 weeks to transform an arrogant combat pilot into someone who could be trusted with other people's lives. It was the academy situation all over again, just compressed and at a higher level. Lydia felt the old familiar excitement, the challenge of a seemingly impossible teaching mission. When does he arrive? She asked. Tomorrow morning, and Commander. I know your reputation says you're patient and methodical, but this kid doesn't respond to patience. He needs someone who can outfly him, outthink him, and make him respect the process. Can you do that? Lydia met his eyes. Sir, I spent 6 years flying rescue missions and another 4 with DEVGRU. I've flown helicopters places they were never designed to go and live to tell about it. I think I can handle one arrogant fighter pilot. Rodriguez grinned. That's what I wanted to hear. Dismissed, Commander. Go get settled. Tomorrow the real work begins. That night in her new quarters, Lydia read through Lieutenant Marchant's file. On paper, he was indeed exceptional. Top scores in flight school, consistently high marks during tactical evaluations, multiple air-to-air victories during his deployments. But between the lines, a troubling pattern emerged. Complaints from wingmen about him taking unnecessary risks. Friction with leadership over his refusal to follow standard procedures. A near-miss incident where his deviation from the flight plan almost resulted in a collision. He was talented, fearless, and completely undisciplined. Exactly the kind of pilot who either became a legend or a cautionary tale, with very little middle ground. Lydia made notes, sketching out a training plan. She'd start by establishing credibility, showing Marchant that she could back up her authority with competence. Then she'd break down his assumptions, make him question the shortcuts and cowboy tactics he relied on. Finally, she'd rebuild him with a foundation of disciplined aggression, the kind that made great combat pilots instead of just flashy ones. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for 6 weeks, but she'd done harder things. The next morning she stood in the briefing room waiting for Marchant to arrive. He walked in 5 minutes late, his flight suit perfectly pressed, his demeanor radiating the kind of confidence that tipped over into arrogance. He was young, maybe 28, with sharp features and eyes that assessed everything like he was calculating angles of attack. You must be Commander Corvus, he said, not quite making it a question. I've heard about you. The SEAL team pilot who went to teaching. Must be nice, taking it easy after all that excitement. Lydia didn't react to the provocation. Sit down, Lieutenant. We need to discuss your training program. He sat sprawling in the chair with studied casualness. Let me guess. Lots of PowerPoint presentations about safety and procedures. Maybe some simulator time if I'm lucky. 6 weeks of boredom that won't teach me anything I don't already know. No, Lydia said calmly. 6 weeks of the hardest flying you've ever done. We're going to take everything you think you know about tactical aviation and stress test it until it breaks. Then we'll see what's actually solid and what's just ego. Marchant's eyes narrowed. With all due respect, ma'am, I've flown combat missions. I've gone up against real threats with real consequences. I don't think simulator scenarios are going to challenge me. Lydia stood. Good point. Let's skip the simulators. We're going airborne in 30 minutes. You'll fly lead, I'll fly wing. We're going to run a basic defensive counter-air scenario, and I'm going to show you exactly how many holes there are in your technique. His confidence flickered just for a second. You're going to fly against me. Problem with that, Lieutenant? He recovered quickly, that arrogant smile returning. No, ma'am, should be interesting. 30 minutes later, they were strapped into separate FA-18s, taxiing toward the runway. Aircraft were training variants, less capable than the fleet models Marchant was used to, but more than sufficient for what Lydia had planned. Over the radio, Marchant's voice came through. Ready when you are, Commander. Hope you can keep up. Lydia's reply was ice-cold calm. We'll see. Fight's on in 3, 2, 1, execute. They launched, and for the first 2 minutes, Marchant flew exactly like his file suggested. Aggressive, flashy, using every ounce of the aircraft's performance to press the attack. He was good, genuinely good, his hands moving with the kind of precision that came from natural talent refined by experience. But Lydia was better. She'd flown everything from ancient Hueys to cutting-edge attack helicopters, and while the FA-18 was new to her, the principles of three-dimensional maneuvering were universal. She let Marchant think he had the advantage, let him commit to an attack run, then broke hard and reversed, putting herself on his six before he even realized he'd been outmaneuvered. "Guns, guns, guns," she called over the radio. "You're dead, Lieutenant. Knock it off and reset." The silence on the radio was profound. They reset and went again, and this time Marchant was more cautious, trying to use tactics instead of raw performance. It didn't help. Lydia killed him 4 times in 20 minutes, using different techniques each time, showing him that his bag of tricks was limited and predictable. When they finally landed and debriefed, Marchant sat in the briefing room looking like someone had just explained that gravity was optional and he'd been working way too hard his whole life. "How did you do that?" he asked, the arrogance gone, replaced by genuine confusion. "You're a helicopter pilot." Lydia pulled up the recordings of their engagements, freeze-framing at critical decision points. "I'm a pilot, period. Helicopters, fighters, doesn't matter. The physics are the same, the tactics are the same. What matters is understanding the geometry, anticipating your opponent's moves, staying 2 steps ahead instead of reacting to what's already happened. You're reactive, Lieutenant. You wait to see what the threat does, then respond with the flashiest counter you know. That works against predictable opponents, but anyone with real training will eat you alive." She advanced through the frames, showing him each mistake. "Here, you committed to a vertical maneuver without checking your energy state. I knew you'd run out of airspeed, so I waited and took the shot when you stalled. Here, you went for a high G turn when a simple displacement roll would have been faster and less predictable. Here, you telegraphed your intentions by fixating on me instead of maintaining situational awareness." Marchant stared at the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been the beginning of respect. "I've never been beaten that consistently. Not in training, not in combat." "That's because you've been fighting people who play by the same rules you do," Lydia said. "I don't. I learned to fly in environments where predictability got you killed. Every mission was asymmetric, every threat was unconventional. That taught me to think differently." She shut down the display. "Here's what's going to happen over the next 6 weeks. I'm going to systematically break down every bad habit you've developed. We're going to rebuild your tactical foundation from scratch, and at the end you're going to be twice the pilot you are now, or you're going to wash out, your choice." Marchant was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'm in, but I have one question." "Go ahead." "Why did you leave DEVGRU? Everyone says you were one of their best pilots." "Why give that up for teaching?" Lydia considered the question, deciding how much to share. "Because I realized I could have more impact developing 100 good pilots than being one exceptional operator. The military doesn't need more heroes. It needs more competent professionals who will train the next generation. That's the long game." It was a simplified answer, leaving out Chen's death and the complicated grief that had driven Lydia to leave direct action behind. But it was true enough. Marchant stood, and for the first time since arriving, he looked like a student instead of a cocky fighter pilot. "Thank you for not going easy on me, ma'am. I think I needed that." "You're welcome. Now get out of here and study the tactical references I'm sending you. Tomorrow we start on defensive perimeter tactics, and it's going to make today look gentle." Over the following weeks, Lydia put Marchant through a curriculum that would have broken lesser pilots. They flew multiple times daily, running scenarios that ranged from basic intercepts to complex multi-bogey engagements. She brought in other instructors to play adversary roles, creating situations where Marchant had to coordinate with wingmen, manage communications, and make split-second decisions with incomplete information. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Marchant's flying became more measured, more thoughtful. He started anticipating instead of reacting, planning 3 moves ahead instead of trusting his reflexes. His radio communications tightened up, became more professional. The arrogance didn't disappear completely, but it evolved into confidence backed by genuine competence. In the fourth week, Lydia introduced him to the concept that would define the rest of his career: asymmetric thinking. "You're trained to fight other fighters," she explained during a classroom session. "But the future of air combat isn't going to be symmetrical. You'll face drones, unconventional tactics, enemies who don't follow the rules you learned in flight school. You need to learn to think like them." She showed him case studies from her rescue missions, situations where textbook responses would have failed and improvisation was the only option. A landing zone that was supposed to be secure but wasn't. A mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. An enemy force that appeared from an unexpected direction. In every case, she said, survival depended on abandoning the plan and adapting to reality. That's the skill that separates adequate pilots from exceptional ones. The ability to recognize when your assumptions are wrong and pivot immediately. Marchant absorbed it all, his notepad filling with observations and questions. He was learning to learn, and that was more valuable than any specific technique. By week 5, Lydia judged him ready for the final test. She designed a scenario so complex that even she wasn't sure she could complete it successfully. Marchant would fly a solo mission into hostile airspace, evade multiple threats, coordinate with simulated ground forces, and execute a precision strike against a time-sensitive target. The scenario had 5 layers of complications, each designed to invalidate his previous assumptions and force adaptation. He briefed his plan with meticulous detail, showing Lydia that he'd learned to balance boldness with preparation. She approved it, knowing that the actual mission would deviate from the plan within the first 5 minutes. That's what war did. It took your careful preparations and shredded them, leaving you with nothing but training and instinct. Marchant launched at dawn, his FA-18 climbing into a sky streaked with pink and gold. Lydia monitored from the operations center, watching his progress on radar, listening to his radio calls. The first complication hit 10 minutes into the mission, simulated SAM sites that weren't in the intelligence brief. Marchant adapted, changing his ingress route on the fly, using terrain masking to avoid detection. Good. The second complication: his primary weapon system malfunctioned, forcing him to switch to a less capable backup. He adjusted his attack profile without hesitation, calculating new parameters in real time. Better. The third complication: the ground forces he was supposed to coordinate with came under attack and couldn't provide targeting support. Marchant had to locate the target himself using limited sensors while managing threats from multiple directions. He didn't panic, didn't rush. He worked the problem systematically, prioritizing tasks, managing his fuel and weapons, staying alive long enough to find a solution. Lydia watched it all with a growing sense of satisfaction. This was what she'd been trying to teach him, the difference between being a talented pilot and being a professional warrior. Marchant found the target, executed a perfect attack run despite the chaos around him, and egressed safely. When he landed and climbed out of his aircraft, his flight suit was dark with sweat, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash, but he was grinning. "That was insane," he said when Lydia met him on the flight line. "Nothing went according to plan." "It never does," she replied. "But you handled it. You adapted, you prioritized, you completed the mission. That's what matters." They walked to the debrief room together, and Marchant went through his mission with the same analytical precision Lydia had taught him. He identified his mistakes without prompting, explained his decision-making process, and proposed improvements for next time. This was the transformation she'd been working toward. Not just better flying skills, but better judgment. Not just tactical knowledge, but tactical wisdom. Captain Rodriguez attended the final debrief, sitting quietly in the back while Marchant presented his after-action review. When the lieutenant finished, Rodriguez stood. "Lieutenant Marchant, based on Commander Corvus's evaluation and your demonstrated performance, you're cleared to return to fleet operations. Your follow-up assignment will be as a tactics instructor for your squadron. You'll be responsible for training new pilots in the techniques you've learned here." Marchant's eyes widened. Sir, thank you. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Dismissed. After Marchant left, Rodriguez turned to Lydia. You did it again. Took someone everyone else wanted to quit on and turned them into an asset. How? Lydia shrugged. Same way anyone teaches anything. Figure out what they need, provide it, hold them accountable. Marchant didn't need someone to tell him he was talented. He already knew that. He needed someone to show him that talent without discipline is just wasted potential. Rodriguez nodded slowly. We've got 3 more like him in the pipeline. Similar profiles, similar issues. You up for it? That's what I'm here for, sir. Over the next year, Lydia worked her way through a succession of problem students, each one presenting unique challenges. Some were arrogant like Marchant. Others were timid, skilled, but lacking confidence. A few had been traumatized by combat experiences and needed to rediscover their love of flying. She approached each case individually, crafting custom curricula, finding the right balance of challenge and support. And slowly, her reputation grew. The instructor who could fix anyone. The commander who never gave up on a student. The one who'd survived being pushed off a building and turned her attackers into officers worth respecting. Pilots started requesting assignment to her courses specifically. The ones who knew they were good but wanted to be great. The ones who'd hit a wall in their development and needed someone to help them break through. The ones who'd screwed up and were looking for redemption. Lydia worked with them all, and though not every story ended in success, most did. The failures hurt, the students who couldn't or wouldn't make the necessary changes, but she learned from each one, refining her approach, getting better at reading people and understanding what they needed. 2 years into her assignment at NSAWC, she got a call from an unexpected source. Admiral Christine Vance, the Chief of Naval Air Forces, wanted to meet. Lydia arrived at the Admiral's Pearl Harbor office on a humid Tuesday afternoon, her uniform crisp despite the heat. Admiral Vance was a lean woman in her 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Commander Corvus, sit. We need to talk about your future. Lydia sat, wondering what this was about. Vance got straight to the point. I've been watching your career with interest. You've developed a methodology for tactical instruction that's producing measurable results. Your students are outperforming their peers in fleet operations. Your rehabilitation success rate is nearly 80%. That's unprecedented. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to make your life complicated. Vance pulled out a folder. The Navy is standing up a new program, Advanced Leadership and Tactical Excellence, or ALTE. It's designed to identify and develop our highest potential officers across all aviation platforms. Fighters, helicopters, maritime patrol, everything. We need someone to run it. Someone with broad operational experience, demonstrated teaching ability, and the credibility to challenge flag officers when necessary. Lydia felt her stomach tighten. Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified to. You're the only person I'm considering. Vance cut her off. This job requires someone who's been at the sharp end and chosen teaching over glory. Someone who understands that developing people is harder than flying missions. You're that person, Commander. The question is whether you're ready for it. Lydia took a breath, thinking about the path that had brought her here. From that rooftop at the academy to this moment, sitting across from a 3-star admiral being offered the kind of position that would define the rest of her career. What would it entail? She asked. Vance smiled. Everything. You'd report directly to me. You'd have authority to pull any officer in naval aviation for training. You'd design curriculum, set standards, and evaluate performance at the strategic level. You'd also travel constantly because this program will operate worldwide. It's going to be exhausting, frustrating, and probably the most important job you'll ever have. When do I start? The transition took 3 months. Lydia moved to a small office in San Diego, assembled a staff of instructors she'd worked with over the years, and began building ALTE from the ground up. The program's first cohort consisted of 20 officers, ranging from junior lieutenants to senior commanders, all identified as high-potential leaders. Lydia's mandate was simple: make them better, not just at flying or tactics, but at the complete spectrum of military leadership. She designed a curriculum that combined practical flying exercises with classroom instruction on strategy, ethics, personnel management, and organizational dynamics. She brought in guest speakers from across the military and private sector. She created scenarios that forced students to grapple with impossible choices, the kind where every option had costs and success was measured in degrees of failure rather than clean victories. The first graduation ceremony took place on a windswept tarmac in San Diego with Admiral Vance presiding. The 20 officers stood at attention as Vance addressed them. You've completed the first iteration of ALTE, and you're now part of an experiment in leadership development. The Navy is watching to see what you do with this training. Don't waste it. Lydia watched from the side, feeling the weight of what she'd built. These 20 officers would go on to command squadrons, lead air wings, shape policy. They'd carry forward what she'd taught them for better or worse, and that responsibility was heavier than any she'd felt before. After the ceremony, she found Brennick waiting for her. He was a major now, wearing Marine Corps insignia, his face weathered by deployments but still carrying that earnest determination she remembered. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, grinning. "Heard you were doing big things." Lydia actually laughed, pulling him into a brief hug. "Brennick, what are you doing here?" "Dropping off a package." He handed her a thick envelope. "Letters from all 5 of us. We're scattered across the world now, but we wanted you to know what we've been up to. Morrison's in Afghanistan teaching Afghan pilots. Hayes just made colonel. Ortiz is flying F-35s. Park's at the Pentagon working on acquisition policy. And I'm here, running a training squadron, doing my best to pass on what you taught us." Lydia opened the envelope, scanning the letters. They were full of updates, stories about the officers they'd become, gratitude for the second chance she'd given them. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. Brennick shrugged. "Thank you for believing we were worth saving. We talk about that night on the rooftop sometimes, about how differently things could have gone. You changed the trajectory of 5 lives, Commander. That's not a small thing." After he left, Lydia sat in her office reading the letters, feeling the connections that stretched across years and continents, the invisible web of influence that teaching created. She'd started this journey thinking she was just one instructor, one person trying to do right by difficult students. But the ripples kept spreading, touching people she'd never meet, shaping decisions in ways she'd never see. That night she called Commander Webb. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm. "Corvus, long time." "How's the new job?" "Overwhelming," she admitted. "But good. How are things with you?" "Retired, actually. Put in my papers last month. 28 years was enough. Now I'm consulting, teaching civilian helicopter pilots, enjoying life without the constant deployments." They talked for an hour, catching up, sharing stories. Before they hung up, Webb said something that stuck with her. "You know what the best part about teaching is? You never really know the full impact. Someone you taught 20 years ago might use something you said to make a critical decision, and you'll never hear about it. But it happened because you were there, because you cared enough to do the hard work of instruction. That's legacy, Lydia. That's the long game." She sat with that thought long after the call ended, looking at the photographs on her office wall. Her old rescue crew, the 5 cadets from the academy, her first ALTE graduating class, a growing gallery of people she'd taught, people who'd taught her, people connected by the invisible threads of shared experience and hard-won wisdom. The Raven plaque from Brennick and the others sat on her desk, a reminder of where this path had started, who taught us to fly with honor. She traced the carved wings with one finger, thinking about honor and legacy and the strange journey from combat pilot to teacher to architect of a program that might shape naval aviation for the next generation. Her phone buzzed. A message from Admiral Vance. "Second ALTE cohort selections are in. 40 officers this time." "You ready?" Lydia typed back. "Ready, ma'am. Let's build something that lasts." And in the quiet of her office, with the sun setting over San Diego and the sound of aircraft launching from North Island audible through the window, Commander Lydia Corvus smiled. Because she'd finally found her mission. Not in the cockpit, not in combat, but in the patient, difficult work of developing people who would go on to do things she could only imagine. The Raven had learned to build nests instead of just returning from the dead. And somehow, that felt like the most important flight of all. She thought about Chen sometimes, wondering what her old co-pilot would think of this trajectory. Chen had died believing in the mission, believing in the people they were protecting. But she'd also believed in passing knowledge forward, in making sure the next generation was better prepared than they'd been. "I think you'd approve," Lydia whispered to the memory. "I think you'd say I'm finally getting it right." The photograph didn't answer, but in the fading light, Chen's smile seemed to hold a kind of benediction. Outside, the first stars were emerging in the darkening sky. Somewhere, pilots were flying missions. Somewhere, students were struggling with material that seemed impossible. Somewhere, an instructor was making the choice to invest in someone difficult, someone who might not seem worth the effort. And somewhere, decades from now, one of Lydia's students would face an impossible situation and remember something she'd said, some principle she'd taught, and make the right call because of it. That was the legacy. Not medals or commendations or promotions. Not even the lives saved or missions accomplished. The real legacy was the knowledge passed forward, the standards maintained, the culture of excellence perpetuated through deliberate, patient teaching. Lydia stood, stretched, and began preparing for tomorrow. 40 new students, 40 different stories, 40 chances to get it right. The work never stopped, never got easier, never stopped mattering, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Because in the end, this was what service meant. Not the dramatic moments of heroism, but the daily grind of making things better, one student at a time, one lesson at a time, one impossible situation transformed into an opportunity for growth. The rooftop had been the beginning. Everything since then had been the continuation of a mission she hadn't even known she was on. Teaching wasn't a fallback. It wasn't where you went when you couldn't hack it at the sharp end anymore. It was its own sharp end. Its own kind of combat, fought with patience instead of violence, with wisdom instead of weapons. And Lydia Corvus, who'd survived Yemen and Somalia and a dozen other places that didn't exist on any official record, who'd been pushed off a building and turned it into a teaching moment, who'd learned that the hardest missions were the ones that took years instead of hours, was exactly where she needed to be.